In this video, we will be discussing security and permissions in SQL Server. Up until this point, you've logged into the database, you've connected to the server, you've seen your database. You may have wondered how it all works, or maybe you haven't, but today we're going to talk about how everything is actually set up so that you can see your databases and not anybody else's and not make changes to anyone else's. So in order for users to even be able to connect to a database, first they have to authenticate to the server. So in order to do this, they must be set up as a login in the server, and then they must be set up as a user in a particular database if they are attempting to access a database. Logins get created at the server level, and in SQL Server, there are two types of authentication. There's SQL Server Authentication and Windows Authentication. SQL Server Authentication utilizes SQL logins, so the usernames and passwords are set up in SQL Server. Users authenticate against the SQL Server with a username and password. The SQL Server itself verifies the authentication. This is typically used when users come from different domains other than the server. So in this class we use SQL logins because everybody's computer is on a different domain, and even the computers in the majority of the classrooms in the L building on campus are on a different domain than the server. This is also an easier authentication sometimes to manage for people. In a lot of companies, users might not have access. The people managing the SQL Server, they might not have access to Active Directory to manage Windows logins, so when something goes wrong, they can't troubleshoot the SQL logins. So SQL logins are picked just to make things easier. When it comes to Windows logins, though, this is definitely stronger security. So what gets set up in SQL Server is just the Windows login name. The passwords are not set up there. What happens when you authenticate to the SQL Server in this circumstance is that the SQL Server passes the Windows credentials to the operating system. The operating system is joined to the domain, so then it authenticates your credentials against the domain, and it returns basically a yes, this person is who they say they are, or no, they are not, and then your login fails. So to create logins, these may be scripted, and this is the SQL statements to create these, or these may be done through the GUI, and typically a lot of user management is actually done through the GUI in SQL Server. So for SQL Server authentication, you say create login, login name with the password, unspecified password. With Windows authentication, create login, your domain name / your username. So in our case, it would be wctc / your username from Windows. On our SQL Server, you will not have permissions to do this. However, I have already created test user accounts for you that exist. It's your same login name with an underscore test user. So when it comes to creating database users, first the authentication happens at the server. Then a login must be granted access to a particular database. In order to do this, you run a create user statement in the database. As I stated, a user has been created for you. It will be in your Northwind Traders database already. The information is listed on Blackboard as well as in this PowerPoint of how to connect, as well as in the practice problems. So it's your login name plus underscore test user. The password is the same as your normal SQL login password. It's your student ID with the leading zeros. So let's talk a little bit about how access is set up. Generally speaking, it's better to use existing security roles or to create your own and add permissions to those roles than to add access directly to individual users' accounts. Then you add users into roles and they get the permission in the role. Why this is better is because it's good for when you have turnover in an organization. It's really easy to remove one user from a role and put another in when the new person gets hired. It's kind of a pain to have to go through and determine all of the permissions the old user had and then figure out to add them to the new user. So SQL Server comes with some built-in security roles in each database. This is not an exhaustive list. This is about half of the roles. These are the ones that I think are important for you to know. There's a DB data reader role. This allows the user to have select access on any table or view in the database, which means they can read data in anything in the database. There's a DB data writer role. This allows insert, update, delete to any table or view in the database. The user may write data to any table or view. There's a DB DDL admin. Allows the user to perform DDL commands, data definition language, which are the structural changes, the create, alter, drop. And then there's the DB owner role, which makes the user the owner of the database and allows complete access for them to do anything. Custom roles can also be created. We use the syntax for create role and give the role a name. So when we create custom roles, we have to add certain types of permissions. We also have to manage the membership of the user in the role. To add and remove users from role, we use the alter role command. Alter the role, the name of the role. We either add a member, the name of the person we're adding, or we drop the member, the name of the person we're dropping. So to manage the permissions in the roles, there's 3 types of permissions. There are grant permissions. Grant permissions allow access to do something. Then there are deny permissions. Deny permissions explicitly deny access to an object. If someone has both a grant permission on a table and a deny permission on that same table, they will not have access because a deny permission overrides a grant. And then there's a revoke command. This removes either a grant or deny permission. So by default, a user has no access to anything until they are granted access. So the types of permissions we can grant on objects are select permissions. That allows someone to run a select statement. Select can be granted at the schema level, which is in our database, you may have seen all of the tables start with DBO dot. DBO is the schema. It's like a logical grouping of tables in the database. Select can be granted at a table level, or you can even grant it at just a particular column level within the table. So the user may be able to select certain columns in the table, but not all of them. Then there's insert, update, and delete permissions. This allows someone to perform insert, update, and or delete operations on a table or view. These are each separate permissions, so you can allow someone to insert and update but not delete, or update but not insert and delete, or any combination thereof. These can also be granted at a schema, table, or column level. Then we have our create permissions. This allows a user to create tables, views, stored procedures, etc. You grant create on each object type. So you might grant someone grant create table. We have alter permissions that allows someone to make changes to tables, views, stored procedures, etc. And then execute permissions, which allows a user or role to execute a stored procedure. So let's go ahead and do some demo now. I'm going to switch over to SQL Server. So when you log into SQL Server, this is typically similar to what you see. Probably not quite as many databases as I have listed, but you only see yours. What's on the server under my admin account is everybody's databases, databases that you may never even know exists. And if we go down to the logins, we can even see everybody's logins in this database, what the name of the login is. So that's a lot of stuff there that's just simply hidden from your view through the use of good security. So back to the databases, let's go ahead and create some custom roles in our database. So my database, I have my test user account in here. If I look under the security tab in my database, I'll find my test user account. If you look under the security tab in your database, you will find your test user account. So let's go ahead and work through some scenarios. We need to set up a role for HR. They must be able to see and modify data in the employees table and view information in the orders table to see what orders an employee has made. All right, so first things first, we're going to create a role. So create role, HR. That creates the role. Now we're going to add permissions. So they need to be able to see and modify data in the employees table. We're going to grant select. Now modify, does that just mean update? Modify typically means insert, update, and delete, though you should probably clarify if you're in an organization that that's what they actually mean. So we're going to grant select, insert, update, delete on employees. So the grant permission is going to give access to do these items. They can do a select command, an insert command, an update command, a delete command on the employees table, and we are granting this to HR. This is the role. So I'm going to go ahead and run that role, and I'm going to add the permissions on the role. Now, permissions in SQL Server are one thing that is really difficult to see by querying tables. It's much easier to simply look this up using the GUI. Under my security tab, I'm going to go to my roles, and before I do that, I'm going to refresh because this side of Management Studio doesn't stay in sync with what gets done in the queries. So I'm going to go roles, and I'm going to go to database roles. Under my database role, I now have an HR role. And I'm going to right click and say properties, or you could double click. And this is going to bring up the GUI for managing the role. If I look at the secure roles, this tells me what types of objects this role has permission to. This might take a minute depending on your system and how many objects are in your database. The one securable here is the employees table. And if I scroll down on the permissions for the employees table, you'll see that delete is granted. You'll see that insert is granted. You'll see that select is granted. And you'll see that update is granted. So exactly what we did in our query. But if we go back to the General tab, you'll see there's no members of this role. So let's go ahead and add the test user to this role and test out these permissions to see if they work. Alter role, HR, add member. This is going to be your test user. I'm going to run this. And now we're going to test this out. In order to test this out, we need to connect to SQL Server as this other user. I'm going to collapse my database. You'll see I actually have two connections here. At the end, one is with my normal login. The second one is with my admin account. I'm going to hit the connect button again on the left-hand side and connect to the database engine. And with the login for my test user account, now in order to do some testing, I actually have to open a query under this connection. So with this connection highlighted, I'm going to send a query. And at the top of my query, you can actually see that it says test user, or if I hover, it's going to say in the parentheses, this is the test user account. Whereas if I hover over the other query window, it's connected with my normal account. So we said that the test user can only see the employees table right now. We have some more adding to do with permissions. But right now they can only see employees, and they can select, insert, update, and delete on employees. So if I run a select star from products, my test user account shouldn't be able to see anything. Let me make sure I'm in the right database here. Now under your test user account, you will see everybody's database listed in this drop-down box, but it won't have access to anything other than the one database that you have it set up in. So now if I go ahead and try to select star from products, it tells me that the select permission was denied on products because I didn't give this user access. So this doesn't work, and it shouldn't, so that's correct. But what should work is we should be able to select from employees. And there are all my employees. So this does work, and it should. I should also be able to insert into employees. So if I look at my employees table, I have to include anything that doesn't allow nulls in my insert statement. So I need a last name, a first name, a hire date, and an email address. So let's go ahead and add a new employee. Insert into employees, last name, first name. I'm going to include a job title, hire date, and email address. And we are going to hire Mickey Mouse because that is my son's absolute favorite TV character at this point in time. So last name Mouse, first name Mickey, job title Chief Fun Officer, hire date, let's just make that 1/1/2018, email address mouse@nwtraders.com. And when I run that, it says one row affected. And if I look at my table, Mickey Mouse is now an employee. So I should be able to perform an update to update employees. Let's give Mickey Mouse a birth date. I'm not sure when Mickey's birth date is, but he's pretty old. Let's pick 1/2/1930. Where employee ID 23. This is Mickey's ID. That worked. And if I run my select again, I can see Mickey's now got a birthday. And I should also be able to delete. So at this point, we're just going to clean things up and delete Mickey from the database. Delete from employees, their employee ID equals 1. And that worked too. So the last piece on here was to view information in the orders table. We didn't add that. Permission denied. So this didn't work, but it should have. So let's go ahead and add that. Just going to add the permission up here. Grant select on orders to HR. Okay, that was added to the role. Now I can go back here and try again. And now it works because the permission is granted. So I'm going to add some comments here, so if you're reviewing this later. Great, so that's good. So now we'll add another scenario. Create a role for the employee directory. This role should be able to select employee names and departments. But nothing else. No, there are no departments. We'll do names and job titles. Create role, employee directory, grant select on employees. Now it says names and job titles. We should only allow the 2 name fields and the job title. So I'm going to specify the fields that this role should be able to select. Grant select on employees, first name, last name, job title. To employee directory. Remember both of those. Now, before I add my test user to this role and test it out, I want to remove them from the other role because for testing purposes, I want to make sure that there's no other permissions from other roles being included. So a user can be part of many roles and they get all of the permissions from all of the roles together. So I'm going to drop the number. And I'm going to verify over here that this user no longer has permissions to employees. They can't see anything. Alter role employees or employee directory. Add member test user account. So now, let's test this new role up. So if I do a select star from employees, instead of just getting permission denied to the table, I'm told that permission is denied on all of these columns in the table. It's because I only allowed select access to 3 columns. So I can't try to select star. So I have to actually write a different select statement here. Select last name, first name, job title, employees. This will work though. And there's all the information. So we got this all set, all good. So let's do one more thing here. Add my comments down. Let's grant some permissions to create and alter things. So let's create a developer role. Allow the developer to select from any table and to create and alter tables, views, stored procedures. So create role developer. So there's a couple ways that I could grant the select permissions to this role. I could grant select on the schema to the role, or I could add the user to the DB data reader role. So let's add them to the schema for now. Grant select on schema. This is a little weird syntax. To developer. So if you'll notice, all of our tables are in the DBO schema, DBO dots. That's how they're listed. So if I grant select on schema DBO to developer, they'll get to select anything in that schema, any table that starts with DBO. Okay, and create and alter tables, views, and stored procedures. Grant create table to developer. I'm going to copy paste. Grant create view. Grant create stored procedure. No, just create procedure, sorry. And then for alter, I can just grant alter to developer. And then I could go ahead and test these all out too. I'm just going to show you the select. Rather than creating a table of view stored procedure, we'll just create a simple view to show that one of them works, and then we'll modify a view. All right. Let's just do, oh, I forgot before we do that. Let's drop the user from the photo role. And now let's add them to this developer role. So select star from products. This should work. Okay. Select star from employees. There's two of them. I'm just going to grab this query we wrote last time. I'm going to make a view out of it. I'm going to run that. Okay, that allowed us to do it. And let's just simply run a select on this view. And that works as well. You could and probably should in theory test all the permissions, but what typically happens is that a cursory test is done. So back to security. While it's really easy to grant security at a higher level, at the database or the schema level, the best practice is to limit users to the least amount of access necessary to do their jobs. This prevents users from performing malicious acts in the database because you can't do things you don't have access to. This can also help prevent some form of SQL injection attack. Our next video will focus on SQL injection and how we can manage it through security and permissions in the database. That is the end of the lesson on basics of security in SQL Server.